It's a quick visit, but jam-packed to strengthen Canada's ties with two of its closest allies, France and the United Kingdom.
And Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, used his first official overseas trip to meet with the leaders of Britain and France, seeking support from old allies as relations with the U.S. sour.
For decades, Canada and the United States have been the closest of allies economically, politically, and culturally, but beneath the surface, tensions are brewing. Trade disputes, shifting global alliances, and growing economic independence are pushing Canada towards an unprecedented decision, distancing itself from the United States. But here's the real shocker: Canada's latest moves suggest that this shift is not just speculation anymore. The Prime Minister just bypassed Washington entirely, heading to Paris and London instead. And former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney has vowed to reshape Canada's foreign policy. So, what does this all mean? Is this the beginning of the end for North America's strongest partnership? It's tradition. When a Canadian Prime Minister is elected or has major diplomatic talks, the first stop is almost always Washington, D.C. But this time, the Prime Minister skipped the U.S. altogether, choosing instead to visit Paris and London first. Why? Officially, Ottawa claims the visits were about strengthening economic and defense ties with Europe. But many experts believe there's more to it. Mark Carney, former Bank of Canada and Bank of England governor, has stepped into the political scene with a mission to reshape Canada's foreign policy and make it less dependent on the United States. Carney, a respected economist and global strategist, has openly criticized Washington's recent economic aggression. And now, with Canada securing preliminary deals in finance, technology, and energy with European nations, whispers of a new-centered future are growing louder. Could this be the moment Canada pivots away from the U.S. for good? To understand how we got here, we have to rewind back to the infamous Trump-era tariffs. 2018, former U.S. President Donald Trump slaps heavy tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, citing national security concerns. Canada, America's closest trade partner, was blindsided. The retaliation was swift. Canada imposed billions in counter-tariffs and relations soured. Even with Joe Biden in office, many of these protectionist policies haven't fully been reversed. Canada's frustration is clear. We were America's stabilizing supplier, yet we're being treated as a competitor. Mark Carney has openly stated that Canada will no longer tolerate unilateral economic impositions. Instead, he's pushing for a diversification strategy looking towards Europe and Asia as alternative economic partners. But there's another reason Canada is rethinking its alliance. Here's something that will send shockwaves through Canada's defense sector. Recent reports suggest that the United States may have a kill switch for the F-35 fighter jets Canada is set to purchase. These high-tech aircraft costing Canada billions are supposedly controlled by U.S. software. That means, in theory, Washington could remotely disable Canada's fighter jets in a crisis. Imagine that. Ottawa spends billions on a fleet of state-of-the-art aircraft, only to find out that they are not fully under Canadian control. This revelation has sparked outrage. Some Canadian officials are now considering backing out of the deal entirely, a move that would send shockwaves through the Pentagon. Could Canada be looking at European alternatives for its defense needs? That brings us to the next major development. The Arctic is melting, and with it comes a new geopolitical battleground. For years, Canada has claimed sovereignty over vast Arctic waters, but the United States has refused to recognize this claim. Washington insists these are international waters, meaning they and other global powers could freely operate there. This is a direct threat to Canada's security and economic interests. With Arctic shipping lanes becoming more accessible, the region is becoming a goldmine for trade and resource extraction. If the U.S. challenges Canada's sovereignty in the north, it could drive an even deeper wedge between the two countries. And this is where Europe comes into play. France's Emmanuel Macron and the UK Rishi Sunak have both extended invitations for Canada to join new defense and economic collaborations. Macron has suggested joint development of military technology, including next-generation fighter jets, potentially offering Canada an alternative to the F-35. Meanwhile, post-Brexit Britain is eager to secure new trade deals, and Canada, thanks to Mark Carney's deep ties with London, is at the top of their list. Even Germany has expressed interest in closer energy cooperation with Canada, particularly after cutting ties with Russian gas. With these opportunities, it's no wonder Canada is looking beyond the U.S. If Canada pulls back from the U.S. alliance, Washington won't sit idly by. The biggest risk? Economic retaliation. The U.S. could impose further tariffs on Canadian exports hitting sectors like agriculture, lumber, and automotive manufacturing. There's also the energy question. Could Washington block or restrict Canadian oil and gas exports to the U.S.? If so, it could disrupt global supply chains and drive energy prices sky high. And then there's NATO. If Canada distances itself from U.S.-led defense initiatives, it could weaken North America's collective security structure. But perhaps the biggest concern is public perception. Many Americans view Canada as their closest and most reliable ally. If relations deteriorate, it could mark a major psychological shift in how the two nations see each other. So, what's next? Mark Carney's multi-front strategy is clear. Canada wants to diversify its partnerships, reduce reliance on the U.S., but still maintain key ties where necessary. This balancing act won't be easy. If relations with Washington sour too much, Canada risks economic and political consequences. But if it successfully strengthens its ties with Europe and Asia, it could emerge as a more independent global player. For the U.S., losing Canada as a primary ally would be a geopolitical earthquake, one that could reshape North American security, trade, and diplomacy. The question remains, is Canada's pivot away from the U.S. a calculated strategy for the future or the beginning of an irreversible split? What do you think? Is Canada making the right move by stepping away from U.S. dominance, or is this a dangerous game that could backfire? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's biggest power shifts.